Welcome everybody to our first event of the spring semester of the Allied programming that we have for you today. I first want to take a minute and thank everyone for coming today and attending today's lecture because it means that we're all coming together to be innovators in the realm of diversity and inclusion. And I really want to share my gratitude towards that. But in order to make any of these events happen, I have to first and foremost thank the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for providing the funding for the Allied program. The Allied program is the program that we're running, and it stands for Allies for Leading Learning, Inclusion of Education of Disabilities. I also have to thank the amazing team that's behind Allied, and it starts off with Dr. Sandra Schuffelbein, Mr. Josh Joseph, Miss Shanna Fagans, Dr. Elizabeth Janey, and Miss Krissa Harmon. I am honored to present to you today attorney Christine Griffin, who's come to share her story. She has served over a decade as the executive director of the Disability Law Center here in Boston. She has also been nominated by Bush to be the commissioner for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and then she was nominated by Obama to be the deputy director of Office of Personnel Management. I hope we can all sit down today and hear what attorney Christine Griffin has to say. And thank you for coming.
I'm really impressed that she's sort of taken her experience and created this group Allied. It's very impressive that someone who's, a busy person is, wants to educate people about issues related to people with disabilities. And it's not just because she has a disability, but it's because she realizes that education is the key to people learning and accepting people with disabilities. And really, it's the only way to become inclusive. Okay, so as I was saying, I grew up not far from here, and I grew up in a big family. There were 7 kids, and my father worked 2 jobs. My mother stayed at home. That's what you did in those days. And there really wasn't money to go to college. And in those days, your parents did not encourage you. As a matter of fact, they told you couldn't take loans to go to college. They did not want you ending up in a lot of debt starting out your life. So they basically, my parents said to all of us, you can go to college, but you have to figure out how to pay for it, and you can live here for free in our house. So that was the deal. So
Having trouble with the sound? Yeah, it's fixed now.
it's, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
great.
thank you. So when I got out of high school, I thought I wanted to be a teacher, and I went to Boston State College, if people remember what was right up the street. Boston State College was then a teacher's college. It's now Mass College of Art, I think. And I went there for a semester, and I also worked as a teacher's aide in the Boston public school system. And I realized quickly that I really didn't want to be a teacher. It seemed like a great thing. It seemed like a nice career, but not something I was really going to be able to do. Dealing with, well, this was, kindergarten and first grade, those types of classes. So not something that I wanted to spend my life, dealing with little kids. So I went to work, got a job, and tried to figure out what I wanted to do. And I met a young woman who was, a little bit older than myself at the time, and she had just got out of the Navy. I had really never heard about women being in the military, and it seemed like a great idea. And at the time, the Vietnam War was really at an end. It wasn't officially over, but for all intents and purposes, it was. And I thought, this is a good time. This country isn't going to want to jump back into a war. This will be a safe peacetime for me to go in the military and earn the GI Bill. And the GI Bill was, and still is, a mechanism by which the country will pay for you to go to college after you get out of the military. So that's what I did. I went in the Army. I became an operating room technician, and had a pretty good time, actually. I enjoyed my time in the service, and it paid for me to go to college. Well, when I was getting out of the Army, they were just letting women into Mass Maritime Academy, which is a quasi-military school that trains you to be, at the time, it was only 2 degrees. You could be a captain or a chief engineer in the merchant marine. So I thought that's an ideal job for me. You only worked either 4 months on, 4 months off, 6 months on, 6 months off. You made a lot of money. I'd see the world. This was perfect. So off I go to Mass Maritime Academy. And lucky for me, a woman had sued them because they didn't allow women to go there. And I was a beneficiary of her lawsuit. She never was, because by the time it wound itself through the courts, she had gone off to college somewhere else and, didn't really benefit by that. But there were a whole bunch of women that did, and I was one of them. So I went to Mass Maritime, and unfortunately, in my junior year, I was in a car accident and I became a paraplegic. And so then I had to shift gears. So my idea of working as an engineer on a ship wasn't really feasible. And so I started to think, okay, what else am I gonna do? And I decided to go back to Mass Maritime and finish my engineering degree. And it's a marine engineering degree, but it's very similar to a mechanical engineering degree. And then I worked as a mechanical engineer for several years for the Food and Drug Administration. And while at the Food and Drug Administration, I got very interested in the legal side of things that happen. So once you violate the food and drug laws, what happens then? And I really liked watching the progression of cases when it became legal. And then I got this big idea, I'll go to law school. I'll do that aspect of it. And then I thought, well, I'll go to law school, and maybe with my engineering degree, I'll do something in patent law. I want you to know at this point in time, I'm a woman with a disability for about probably 10 years at that time. And I knew nothing about disability rights law. Didn't even know it existed. Had no idea. Now, I arguably somewhat intelligent, but had no idea. I thought I was the best advocate in the world. And what I didn't know is that everybody else did know about disability law. And at that time, what the law was the Rehab Act of 1973. And there were provisions in the regulations that said you can't discriminate on the basis of disability if you take any federal money whatsoever. And that's almost everybody. And so when I was working for the federal government for the Food and Drug Administration, and they would have a new program, like, we're gonna send all the engineers out to these different medical device manufacturers. And because we're sending out investigators, but a lot of times they don't understand the engineering process of a medical device and how it's made. And so we'll send engineers with them. And I remember the day they announced this, my boss looked right at me in front of everybody and said, oh, but Chris, you won't be able to do this. And I said, oh, really? Let's talk about that. So we had a discussion about it, and I argued vehemently that it was unfair that I couldn't do that too. That every one of these companies had loading docks. They may have steps in the front entrance, but I could easily push myself in, at the time in my manual wheelchair, right up the loading dock. And I should be allowed to do this work as well. So, they backed right down. Now, of course, in their heads, I realized years later, they're thinking, she's saying the word fair. She's, we have a complaint process here that she could take advantage of. I actually didn't know any of this. Didn't know about the complaint process. Didn't know. I just really did believe I was this fabulous advocate for myself. And so I was able to do a lot of things. And I want to say it wasn't just me. In various places that I worked in different offices for the Food and Drug Administration, there was usually a manager or someone who believed in me, who saw my work and saw that it was good, and sometimes better. than other people's work, and that they really promoted the idea that I be included and able to do a lot more than they really wanted me to do. I think a lot of them looked at me as, gee, why doesn't she just, shut up and be happy she has a job? And that's how society treats people with disabilities a lot of times. It's why don't you just shut up and be happy that you got what you got? And don't bug us about, wanting more or wanting to advance in any way. So after the Food and Drug Administration, and I said earlier, I like the legal side of it, I decided to go to law school. And I get to law school, and my classmates is here, Tim will attest, we get to BC, and everything's going along fine, except I have to go through this sort of convoluted route to get to classes, and it all depends on the elevator and if the elevator is working or not. And again, I could, I was, in some dean's office yelling about the fairness of the elevator working or not working, and me getting to my classes, and got through law school fine, but learned in law school that there was this whole body of law related to disability rights. And I was just so surprised that I didn't know about it. And it really took going to law school to learn about it. And the thing that really brought it to the forefront is in my first year of law school in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed. And I knew nothing about what had happened leading up to that, although I was the beneficiary of all the leaders in the disability rights movement. I was the beneficiary of all the great stuff that they did, all the work that they did. If you haven't heard of Judy Heumann, there's a great book called Being Human, and she's really one of the founders of the disability rights movement. And, just all this stuff was happening, and I was totally unaware of it. I don't know, maybe you're all too young, but I don't know who remembers anything back in the 70s about the sit-in that happened and about the fight to get regulations for the Rehab Act or anything like that. And that was really one of the hallmarks of the movement. And I'm sure I saw it on TV. I wasn't disabled yet, so I guess it didn't interest me, or I just didn't pay attention to it. I don't remember it. I don't remember, and I'm sure it was on TV and talked about a lot and written about, but yet I didn't know anything about it. And so to learn all this and to learn that there was now this developing body of law, all the ideas I had about going to law school and about doing something related to engineering and patent law or food and drug law really went right out the window. I started to really look at all the different aspects of disability rights law. My first summer job I got working for Tom O'Neill, Tip O'Neill's son, who had a lobbying practice in Boston. He wanted me to find out everything I could about the ADA and how it was going to impact his clients. It still wasn't even in effect yet. It was passed in 1990, but it wouldn't actually go into effect for several years. So I can't tell you that I owe him a great deal because I don't think I ever delivered on my side of the bargain. But what he did was he got me into trainings and other things that allowed me to learn about the ADA. And the more I learned, the more I realized this was the area of law that I wanted to work in. I wanted to be part of this evolution of new law and to really help shape what happened to it. So that was my goal, and I got a fellowship right out of law school, a Skadden fellowship, and that allowed me to work, really develop a public interest project, find a home for it, which was the Disability Law Center here in Boston, and then implement that project for the next couple of years. And the law firm Skadden Ops, Maha, Slate, I don't know, it's got about 6 other names. They actually paid for it. It was fabulous. It's a fabulous fellowship program that still goes on today. They pay your salary and all your benefits, and a public interest entity gets to host you and have you work there. So I did that, and my goal was to do outreach to underrepresented groups of people with disabilities and teach them about the ADA. These are your rights. These are your civil rights, and you need to know about them. Because I certainly didn't, and I had to get to law school before I found out they existed. So I knew there were lots of people like me out there that didn't know. So I did that, and then I got an opportunity to go work in DC under the Clinton administration, and I was an attorney advisor to the guy who was the vice chair under the Clinton administration at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It became increasingly more interested in the advancement of employment for people with disabilities as time went on. I love that area of law because I really, and I still believe this, I started to realize the only time when I really didn't feel different, where I felt like I was more included, was really in the workplace. Not ever in the beginning. The beginning was always rocky, but once I was there for a while and I could prove to people that I could do whatever job they were doing and maybe even do it better sometimes, then that really sort of made the disability disappear. And I really found that inclusiveness happens when people with disabilities are in the workforce. And it's a combination of things. I think it's because you're there all day. You're with these people, you're with them more than you're with your family for the most part. And they get to know you, and they get to realize that you have the same dreams and the same goals as they do in life. And the disability starts to disappear. So I became more and more interested in the advancement of employment of people with disabilities. And there's certainly plenty of issues. There were plenty of issues to work on. Access to transportation, access to housing, access to benefits, access to healthcare, access to anything if you have a disability was, certainly something that needed fighting for. But this was where I decided to focus my attention. And I went to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and they were responsible for implementing the employment section of the ADA. And so I was there at a time when we were really, the law was just developing. And it was really a great time to be there and to have influence on what was going on and what was happening. And I came back to the Disability Law Center as the director, and I did that for 10 years. And again, we did a lot of work on employment. We did a lot of work on other things, anywhere from special education to access, discrimination based on disability in any arena there was. But I loved the employment work, and I got a call after I was there about 10 years saying that a commissioner at the EEOC was leaving and would I be interested in it. And Senator Kennedy kind of talked me into it. And he recommended me to, and it was a Republican administration, but it's a bipartisan commission. So I was a Democratic appointee in a bipartisan commission. And so I got nominated and the Senate approved, and off I went with all these ideas in my head about what I was going to do to change the world when it came to employment of people with disabilities. And the big thing I was going to change as I was heading to DC was I was going to find a way to use the power of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to end sheltered workshops. Does anyone know what sheltered workshops are? They still exist, believe it or not, and more so in other states than here. We've done a reasonable job of trying to eliminate them, but sheltered workshops are places where we sent people with disabilities to do what we called work. And it was this charitable, yet someone was making money doing it, warehousing of people with disabilities, and a lot of times it was people with developmental disabilities, where we would put them in a room and someone would contract with the entity that had the people with disabilities as workers, and they would stuff envelopes. So they would do menial types of tasks, and they would get paid based on their productivity. Now, can you imagine working in a workplace and being tested on your productivity on any given day? I mean, some days it's good, some days it's not. Let's be honest, and yet we would test people and pay them on their productivity. Some people would be paid 9 cents an hour, 10 cents an hour, 45 cents an hour. There was the minimum wage rules went right out the window. And this was just a concept that drove me just, I don't want to use the terminology. It just really frustrated me. It frustrated me to no end. And I thought if we could change the rules, and the reason the EEOC never got involved in any of the shelter workshop work is because these people were not considered employees. So they technically didn't meet the definition of employee. They were considered trainees. And so EEOC supposedly couldn't touch them. I was going to do something, I don't know what, but I was going to do something with the Senate Help Committee, and I was going to make sure that we changed that we started calling them employees, then made them eligible for minimum wage, and this was my big idea. So I get there, when you first become a commissioner, or probably in any of these types of agencies, everyone that heads up a department within the agency comes and briefs you on what the work they're doing. And I get briefed by the federal sector people, and I don't know why, and maybe it's because I had worked at the Food and Drug Administration, but I assumed wrongly that the federal government was a really good employer of people with disabilities. And I, of course, learned, no, they're not. And in fact, they're terrible. And I remember sitting at this conference table going, what? So sheltered workshop idea went out the window, and I decided that before we could actually tell private employers what to do, we needed to do it ourselves. And we needed to really figure out, how do you employ and accommodate people with disabilities in a big way, so that we really do start to see inclusion in the workforce and in society overall. And how do we as a government do it? Because frankly, the federal government's one of the biggest employers in the world. And if we could do it there, then we could really model it in other places. So I started this project called Leadership for the Employment of Americans with Disabilities. And I focused on the federal government. And I, went around, I had all the statistics. That was a good part about being at EEOC. You had every agency's statistics about their employment of people with disabilities. You had all their diversity information. And I spent the next couple of years running around the country yelling at every agency I could that they weren't doing a good job, and that they had a lot of nerve even celebrating the employment of people with disabilities in October. So, every October we would celebrate the employment of people with disabilities, and yet and all the agencies would invite you to speak, and I would go to them and I'd say, what are you inviting me for? What are you celebrating? Here's your statistics, look at them, they're miserable. Why don't you, instead of celebrating, why don't you just hire a person with a disability? And so I spent a lot of time doing that. And I can't say that really got me anywhere, except it helped people. People heard me. And in fact, when Obama was elected and I got elevated in leadership at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they had a little chat with me and they said, look, you've been talking about this for a long time. And in fact, you have said that the real changes need to be made at the Office of Personnel Management. Why don't you go over there and actually do that? And I thought, oh God, now I really have to put my money where my mouth is. And off I went to the Office of Personnel Management as deputy director, and in fact began working right away on two things, actually. In getting the president to sign an executive order on employment of people with disabilities within the federal government, and in creating, for the first time ever, believe it or not, a diversity and inclusion office housed within the Office of Personnel Management, where it should have been housed, and which focused on diversity and inclusion of the whole federal government. EEOC could collect statistics and do a whole bunch of other things that were mandated, but they never had the power or the ability to influence the federal agencies in a way that would actually increase diversity and inclusion. And the Office of Personnel Management did. So off I went, and that's what I worked on for the next couple of years. And in fact, President Obama signed both those executive orders, and we were able to implement a lot of really good work that Trump kind of ended, but now it's back in action again. So you can see what a difference an administration can really make. They can come in and really stop or promote various things from happening. So the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at OPM is alive and well, and been very active since this administration came into existence, and the employment of people with disabilities continues. And a lot of us behind the scenes are still trying to get that implemented even more and get it reissued. Obama at the time issued an executive order that said federal agencies had to increase the hiring of people with disabilities by 100,000 over a certain amount of time. We would like to see this president reissue that and get more focus on that as well. Because once attention is taken off something, you know, it doesn't, what's the saying? It's treasured if it's measured. If someone's accountable, it gets done. And that leads to leadership. There has to be leadership when it comes to diversity and inclusion in any aspect. There has to be leadership. It has to come from the top. It has to be, people don't, you know, we all bring our hidden biases to work, to school, to wherever we're going. We bring them with us. And whether we acknowledge it or not, we all have them. And you know, it's really, it's got to be leadership of any organization, whether it's the school you're at, the organization you work for. It's got to be leadership that actually says, this is important to me. And I want to see whatever. I want to see, you know, increases in the diversity and inclusion in this company. And it's not just about getting people in the door, because although some people find that still hard to do, it's about once people get in the door, are you really included? You know, someone once said this, and I like to repeat it often. We get hired because we're different. So everyone, you know, whether it's because you're a person of color or because you're have a disability or because you're a white guy, you get hired for, you know, a reason. There's some reason that the organization, and I'm not saying it's based on those characteristics, it's based on, it should be based on, you know, what you bring to the office. But when people see the value of diversity within, especially within a workforce, and there's a variety of reasons why you can make a business case for that, they then will fire us because we're not the same. And that's really, it's really troubling in that, you know, we're hired because we bring something different to the table, and yet because we can't be exactly the same once we're there, because we are different, we may need an accommodation, we may need some, there's something that we may need to do our job, then all of a sudden, we're not different. I mean, we're not the same. We're somehow different in an aspect that they didn't realize. So what I've learned is that the accommodation process, is key to retaining somebody. And everybody's going to need an accommodation in the workplace at some point in time. Everybody, whether it's, whether you have a disability or not, whether you need to take care of your parents, the whole family medical leave issue came to the forefront because people need to take time off to take care of a sick kid, to take care of a sick parent, to take care of themselves if something happens to them medically. So we're starting to recognize that these are issues that have to be addressed. And these are all accommodations. They're all accommodations in the workplace. So we see, that there's a lot of barriers to people with disabilities getting into the workplace. There's physical barriers, getting access to an accommodation, transportation, getting to transportation to a place of work, things like that. But there's also attitudinal barriers, and that's really the most difficult to address. And unfortunately, we have to rely on laws to change people's attitudes. And it's just the way it is in this country and in lots of other countries as well. So we have to rely on civil rights laws to really change attitudes, because I think we all recognize when we are all in the workforce in a big way, we all start to feel included. That's where inclusion really happens. And so in order to get accommodations and things you need in the workforce, one of the things that I've learned over the years is, and we did it at EEOC when I was there, is you have to centralize the whole thinking about accommodations, and you have to centralize the budget. So people making the decisions about whether Mona gets an accommodation or whether Chris Griffin gets an accommodation should be people that have nothing to do with us and our work. They shouldn't even know us necessarily. They should know a couple of things that the law requires. Did I provide them with the right documentation to get the accommodation? And then whether it's reasonable that they give me the accommodation. That's all they have to really think about. And that's what they have to document. And so when it's taken away from your local manager and supervisor, when that decision is taken away, when the person who's making a decision about whether you get an accommodation or not is not thinking this is coming out of my department's budget, then the decision becomes more fair, more follows the law actually. And your centralized office of accommodations can just make a decision based on, again, what you've provided, what you're asking for, and whether it's reasonable, and not about whether, the department can afford an accommodation. One of the things I like to tell companies and universities and anybody else that's in the business of providing accommodation, whether it's a federal agency, if you don't provide that accommodation and I file a complaint and we go to court over that, the budget that the court's going to be looking at isn't the budget of some small department at Northeastern. They're going to be looking at the whole budget of Northeastern and saying, really, you couldn't have afforded this $10,000 item that would have allowed this person to, not only do their job, but actually be retained and be promoted over time. So that's what's going to happen. They're not going to look at just the budget of a department. That's why it shouldn't be in a department. It should be centralized so that the personal issues I've seen managers actually deny someone an accommodation. I hate to tell you this, but I had someone, a director of an EEOC office, so this is really bad. He's director of an EEOC office, actually tell me that he didn't want to give a secretary the accommodation she needed, which was time off to have surgery. She needed the surgery because she didn't really deserve it. And I remember going, oh my God, I just looked at him. I said, I can't believe you're saying this to me. I cannot believe you are sitting in a commissioner's office at the EOC. You're director of an office and you're actually saying those words. So if he's saying them, you know, other managers are saying them. And they're deciding things based on their own personal ideas about whether you as an employee deserve something, whether they like you or not, or any of that. So that's why I always say that it has to be centralized. Now I'm going to open up for questions and we can have more of a discussion, but I just want to say one thing that I feel hopeful about. There is a silver lining of COVID, and here's what it is. It's telework. For people with disabilities, it's telework. Do you know, that's like the major accommodation that no one could get. I don't care where you worked, how liberal they were. Teleworking for a person with a disability was like almost impossible to get. And the courts, no one would actually, you know, say, yeah, that's an accommodation you have to give someone, to let them work from home. But guess what? What did we learn through COVID? We can all work from home and we can all do a good job, and it's measurable, and it's, you know, well, not everybody can work from home. I mean, the silence was, well, I guess you could through Zoom, right? But there are a lot of jobs that can be work from home. And this is the silver lining in the COVID cloud to me, is that we've proven that people with disabilities can be accommodated, they can work from home. So, you know, transportation issues, other issues that prevent you from being able to get to work and do a job have now been eliminated. And I think that's just incredible. So why don't I stop there and open it up for questions or discussion, anything you want to talk about. Okay. Anyone, questions? It's Friday.
I'll ask a question.
Sure.
What is a moment in your career that brought you joy?
There's been a couple of them and they're really minor, to be honest with you. So like, I'll give you what I think a lot of people consider minor and a major. Well, one of the most joyous things that happened to me, I was a student at BC and I was in the Legal Assistance Bureau. And it's a clinic, it's a law clinic, and basically it's where students learn how to really practice law. And we do it on behalf of people who can't afford attorneys. And I had this client and he was being evicted. And he had been a guy with a developmental disability who had lived at Fernal School most of his life. Anyone know of Fernal? Fernal School's in Waltham. It's closed now, but it was still open at the time that I was doing this. He had left. He was probably about 40 years old, but he had spent probably the first 30-something years of his life living at an institution. And it's where because he was born with the developmental disabilities, his parents, for whatever reason, placed him there. And it's a state-run institution and they took care of him. And then as he got older, he got out. And what that means in an institution is you're not really getting a good education, you're getting a cursory education. And one of the things that he couldn't do is he couldn't read. And he came to the Legal Assistance Bureau because he got something in the mail and he couldn't read it. And he went to his local grocery store where he was friends with the guy who ran it. And he told him he was being evicted from his apartment. And so somehow someone got him, led him to us, and I ended up with him as a client. And while we helped him with the eviction and stayed that off, which was great, that wasn't the part that I thought was so wonderful. I started talking to him about reading, about learning to read. And I hooked him up with a program at the Watertown Library, and it was an adult reading course. And he came back later and just said, oh my God, I never would have thought I could learn to read. And that to me, I'm telling you, that was victory. This was touchdown, getting this guy to read and not so much keeping him in his apartment, although that was good. Then I'll tell you the major joyous thing, I'll tell you, I couldn't have been happier. The day President Obama signed the executive order on employment of people with disabilities in the federal government, I was sitting right next to him. It was a big event. It was the 20th anniversary of the signing of the ADA. And I got to sit right next to him outside. It was, I don't know, what's that area called? I don't know, one of the lawns. We're out there on the lawn. And they had Patti LaBelle singing, and it was amazing. It was hot as hell, let me tell you. And but I got to sit next to him when he signed that, and I had worked. I'm telling you, this was on a Monday, and on Saturday he was reading it for the first time. So it winds through a lot of people, and then eventually gets to him, and this, someone says, "Okay, you're gonna sign this on Monday," and he starts reading it. Okay, what am I signing? And he started asking questions. So on the Saturday before he's going to sign it, people are calling me saying, he wants to know this and he wants to know that. And I'm like running around. I'm calling other people and answering all his questions and hoping to God he doesn't say, I'm not signing this. You didn't answer my question. But we answered all his questions and he did sign it. And sitting next to him, that was a joyous occasion. I think I was just so happy and relieved that he was signing it and that part of the work was over. The implementing part was ahead of us, but getting that side was a big deal. So those are probably my two biggest accomplishments. Yeah.
If you feel comfortable sharing, do you particularly remember any questions that President Obama had about the act before he signed?
Yeah. You know what he wanted to know? Oh my God. And what's the answer? He said, we were saying he was signing the saying you have to commit to hiring 100,000 more people within the federal government it was a 5-year period of time. His question was, what if we don't do that? What if we can't do that? I wanted to say, my answer would have been, just sign it. We'll deal with that later. But of course I couldn't say that. So I then had to dig into history and I found that, and it was even more involved than that. It wasn't just what if we can't do it? What if there's a hiring freeze within the federal government and we can't do it? That's what it was. And again, my answer would have been just sign it. We'll deal with that if it happens. But I had to actually go back in time and find that during the Reagan administration, there had been a hiring freeze except for people with disabilities. And it was one of the first times in the federal government where everyone was like, okay, so we can only hire people with disabilities. All of a sudden they could find them and they could hire them. And the numbers increased dramatically. So that's what I found was that, and I went back and was able to say, this is what's happened in history with Reagan. If there's a hiring freeze, you can actually say, except for people with disabilities. So
is an appropriate combination is that people with disabilities can bypass the hiring freeze?
well, you know what's funny? There's a mechanism within the federal government, which is another reason why there should be tons of people with disabilities in the federal government working. That's called Schedule A. And I think it was Truman that signed it originally. And it was a mechanism by which to they knew even back then, we will not hire. If we have an able-bodied person sitting there and a person with a disability, and they're both equally qualified for the job, and maybe the person with the disability is even more qualified, we are still going to hire the person without the disability because that's what we're comfortable with. And so they developed a mechanism by which to get people hired in the federal government without going through the competitive process, because they knew the competitive process was never going to allow people with disabilities in. So they created something called Schedule A, and Schedule A allows you to bypass the whole hiring process, which in the federal government takes forever. And I used to sit there and say to agencies, for God's sakes, it's taken you 7 months to hire people, to get people on board, when you could hire someone like me within, I mean, I could be on board within 30 days. So what's stopping you? I mean, this is a great mechanism by which you can bypass all the paperwork, all the BS that happens in the federal hiring process, and you can get me right in the door. Do you think that would have convinced them? No, it still hasn't. So that mechanism still exists, and some states have it. The city of New York has a similar mechanism. Does it mean the city of New York's the best employer of people with disabilities? No. But they also have a similar way to bypass the competitive process. So,
Thank you.
So there are a couple of questions on Zoom.
okay.
So one of the question is, how can Northeastern University engage with their cooperative learning partners to support neurodiverse students?
How can they partner with their
The
co-ops,
industries,
the
yeah,
co-op,
the co-ops.
the employers,
With their employees to support?
to hire more people who are neurodiverse? Well, I think again, it's a program like this, it's an education program where you actually place people who are neurodiverse in the co-op programs. And you know, a lot of times I don't know, it's a double-edged sword. A lot of times we spend too much time on education. And we educate. We spend 40 years educating and we don't see any progress from it, or we don't see any increases. So at some point we have to say, what are we doing? I think the school has an obligation to place their students in the same process and way they would place anybody else. I think that's the real answer. And that the debate, I'll tell you what happens with co-op programs, is who's responsible for the accommodation. And that's where I've seen arguments occur, that the employers, you know, especially when it's a co-op, it's not, you know, if it was a full-time position, then obviously the employer's the one obligated. A lot of times the employers will say, well, this is a short-term thing. Why should I have to do that? The obligation is still with the employer. But the person is an employee, even though they're a co-op student, they're getting paid. And they should be the ones that accommodates the individual. But sometimes, you know, in order to get someone placed, the school will have to do it just to, you know, to get the person the experience. Because frankly, if you can't come out of a co-op system and not have experience. I mean, that's, you know, that just wouldn't make sense. So.
There's another question. It says, can you offer what an ally can do in the workplace to progress this important equity agenda?
What you can do is you can get leadership to embrace the formation of a diversity inclusive group. If you're talking disability specific, then a disability employment resource group that then has the task of educating the rest of the employees and management about the inclusion of people with disabilities in the workforce.
There's also another question. Is there any federal guidance document that a university like Northeastern or any other organization can refer to, such as a document that outlines the need to have a centralized ADA coordination and accommodation and the budget for such services?
Yeah, this, you know, I'm trying to think of, I think the EEOC on their website would have documents recommending that the accommodation process be centralized. And that might be a place to start. They recommend that not only to federal agencies, but to companies as well. I'll tell you, the government had an amazing centralized accommodation program. There were certain accommodations that the agency would provide themselves. but there was a program called CAP. And it was housed within the Department of Defense. And Congress funded it every year. And it paid for more complicated accommodations, mostly technology-based accommodations. And it was an amazing program. So a lot of the agencies, they didn't even have to pay for this stuff themselves. They could actually go to the client assistance program, the CAP. It wasn't client assistance, that's something else. Computer aided accommodation program. I think that's how it started, with computers, and then it got more technically involved. But they were right over in the Pentagon building, and it was an amazing program. So there was like no reason for federal agency. That was another thing. They'd say to me, you don't even have to pay for half this stuff yourself, for God's sakes. I mean, you know, these are no brainers. Hire a person with a disability, get the accommodation from CAP, and, you know, and stop whining.
There's another question. My friend receives SSI and they recently got hired at a bookshop. However, because they're now working, their benefits were cut so much they can no longer afford their needs.
This is like,
They
no.
feel that this is getting in the way of their right to work. Is there something you've come across in your career, and do you have any tips how I can support or advocate for my friend?
I wish I had a tip, except this is a disincentive to work, what we've done to people with disabilities in this country. So the majority of people, not the majority, but a lot of people with disabilities collect Social Security insurance. It's called SSI. Now if you've worked for a good amount of time and you become disabled, then you would collect SSDI because you've paid into the system. But a lot of times, especially young kids with disabilities, go on SSI because it helps their parents pay for their medical needs and other things that they need throughout their life. But their parents and teachers and other people convince them that they have to stay on this. And it's relegating people with disabilities to a life of poverty. And how it's set up is you get paid this amount of money every month, and I want to say the last time I looked, and it's been a while, it may be $800 a month. Who can live on $800 a month? Okay, and then the state supplements it with another 100 something. So at best, maybe you're getting $1,000 a month, and that's supposed to pay for everything. And if you work, money is taken away. So in this particular instance, his friend went to work, and once he starts working, there's a formula that so much money is taken away for every dollar that you make, till ultimately it's gone entirely. Now, Social Security used to have a program where they would let you keep getting the benefits for a while you worked, and so that you could actually build up a little nest egg and be able to lose the benefits and rely on your paycheck. I'm not sure, there's different things that could have happened where he wasn't allowed to do that. So this is one of the things that has to change in this country. And there's been a lot of people have thought about this and talked about this and written about this, but we relegated people with disabilities to a life of poverty by saying they have to stipulate that they cannot work to get those benefits. So once they go to work, you can't get the benefits, when there would be, if you could phase it in, it would be much better. But this is something that we've done in this country that needs to change. So, but I don't have a good answer. Sorry.
Is there any other questions?
Anyone else? No. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for coming. I know it's a cold Friday and you'd rather probably be somewhere warm, but well, it's warm here, but now you have to go out in the cold. So really appreciate you coming, and thank you to my classmate Tim.
Dr. Griffin, thank you for sharing your life work with us. I would like to invite you all for our next event, which is on the 4th of February. It's called Invisible Disabilities. We're going to talk about mental health. So it's specifically targeted for faculty and staff of Northeastern. All those students are welcome. And we have the website. You can check out all our events in the website. We have events every Friday scheduled in the same place and on the same Zoom link at 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So please join us. I thank you all for coming. I thank the Corey College for providing the room, Dr. Elam for helping us arrange this event. I thank everyone for coming, and please also check out our social media. We are constantly updating about the events, and I look forward to see you all again. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
I thank you for watching this event by the Ally Project. I request you all to visit our website called disabilityawareness.sites.northeastern.edu and also follow us on social media, allied_NU on Instagram and Twitter. I look forward to meeting you in one of our future events. Thank you.